Tonight, premiers butt heads over closed borders, but Anastasia Palaszczuk stands her ground. Calls not returned. China snubs Australia's trade minister as a diplomatic rift widens. What does a typical Australian day look like post-COVID-19 lockdown? And comfort eating. Shelves stripped of flour during isolation, but millers promise it won't happen again. Good evening, Jessica Van Vonderen with ABC News Sunday. The Queensland Premier has hit back at a push from New South Wales to reopen the border as soon as possible to boost the economy and slowly bring back tourism. Anastasia Palaszczuk says moving too soon could set the state back weeks after making considerable progress. The number of active cases in Queensland is dropping, with no new detections today. Here's state political reporter Josh Bavis.
Why is it sometimes the little things that bring back a sense of normality?
I feel like a human again. I feel like I can actually live my life adequately.
The easing of restrictions this weekend has been a relief for customers and workers.
It's kind of like a mental health type of thing, you know, it makes you feel good about yourself. So self-care, that's it. Bit of TLC.
But police are warning they're keeping a closer eye on shopping centres to make sure people don't become lax.
If you do see places that are crowded and there are a number of people gathering around, not to go in there, to exercise some discretion and judgment.
Especially in restaurants and cafes.
I was in a business this morning, it was very clearly that they had the name and address capability at each table, they had the X's marked out and people were being very compliant.
There are no new detections in Queensland and only a dozen active known cases.
People are starting to feel a little bit complacent. Please don't feel complacent.
With the situation easing, pressure is mounting from New South Wales for Queensland to reopen the border after more than 7 weeks.
I've been quietly having a jibe at all of my state colleagues who have their borders shut.
I make absolutely no apologies for protecting the health of Queenslanders. I make no apologies for that.
Anastasia Palaszczuk won't budge, not at least until community transmission down south has ceased.
It would be absolutely negligent of me to lift those restrictions with that community transmission happening down in New South Wales and Victoria.
Queensland's own recent scare over community transmission in Rockhampton, linked to an aged care nurse, is being chased down.
If you are sick, stay at home. It is very clear, and honestly, a nurse should know better.
So far, 235 staff and residents of the North Rockhampton Nursing Centre who have been tested showed negative results for the virus. More than 30 others are awaiting their results. Locals are lining up for testing too as a precaution.
About 5,000 calls to the COVID hotline, which is extraordinary.
National cabinets won't meet until the end of the month, with states in charge of their own restrictions. If all goes to plan, the next stage of easing in Queensland begins in less than 4 weeks. Josh Bavis, ABC News, Brisbane.
To a developing story, police are investigating the deaths of a man and a woman whose bodies were found at a property north of Brisbane this afternoon. Forensics were called to the home on Hazelmere Court at Joyner around 2 p.m, where a major crime scene was established. A command centre has been set up at the Petrie Police Station nearby as detectives continue the investigation. Australia's push for an independent inquiry into the origin of the COVID-19 outbreak has had a significant boost, with scores of countries jumping on board. The coalition of 62 states comes as Trade Minister Simon Birmingham warns China is becoming a risky prospect for Australian businesses. As political editor Andrew Probyn explains, Australia's souring relationship with Beijing might complicate the economic recovery once the health crisis is over.
On a suburban cricket oval is a marvel of modern medicine, a pop-up COVID clinic right next to Canberra Hospital. It went from this to this in just 35 days.
It was seen as an insurance policy. It's one of the few buildings where, we hope no one ever needs to use it.
In fact, there's a good chance this 50-bed hospital is never used because the COVID curve's under control. The shutdowns made that possible at enormous expense, the way out of the economic crisis getting harder.
The call ought to be returned, David.
Trade Minister Simon Birmingham's confirmed his Chinese counterpart is still refusing to pick up the phone.
It's not a reflection upon the Australian government.
Beijing putting Australia in the diplomatic deep freeze for demanding an international inquiry into the origin of the coronavirus outbreak. China's slapped bans on 4 Australian abattoirs and is poised to stop barley exports too. At least one premier's offering to act as an envoy.
Considering the long-standing trading relationship Western Australia's had going back many decades, I'm happy to help.
Advice flowing thick and fast within government too, some from its own backbench, not entirely welcome.
Being so entangled with an authoritarian regime has left our nation open to economic blackmail and boycotts.
But the Australian government's frustrated with its biggest trading partner.
I would expect that many Australian businesses would start to consider whether the risk profile has changed and may therefore look at other markets.
Diversification takes time. It takes years and years, decades, but the work must start now.
China accounts for 36% of Australia's exports, more than double the second biggest. So if Beijing does play hardball, it could cause significant economic pain. But having made its case for an independent inquiry into where the virus started, Australia can't and won't back down, however uncomfortable. That discomfort, though, might be shared. Confirmation late today that more than 60 countries are set to back an inquiry through the World Health Organisation. Andrew Proven, ABC News, Canberra.
A wave of protests against coronavirus restrictions is sweeping across Europe. Despite the easing of lockdown measures in many countries, there's a growing frustration with the economic impact. For many, life has become unbearable and they're now more emboldened in pushing for a speedy return to normal.
They've been labelled COVIDiots, but their numbers continue to swell at protests across Europe.
I'm a human being and I would like to live and breathe without a face mask.
Despite some measures being relaxed, hundreds of Germans gathered for a second week, undeterred by warnings of a new wave of infections. In the worst-hit European countries, there's growing anger at the handling of the crisis. Banging pots and defying police, demonstrators in Spain called for their government to resign.
I have young sons and they are the ones that will suffer from this. It's not fair. We have to leave them a Spain that our parents left us.
Italian hospitality workers stood silently, fearing the slow death of restaurants and cafes due to the restrictions they still face.
The government is taking us on the road of certain failure, because to reopen today, it would be only a very sad and bitter failure for everybody.
Simply putting bread on the table was front of mind for protesters in Poland, who defied a police ban on gatherings to call for restrictions to be lifted. The growing mood of defiance also spilled over to the United Kingdom, where police moved on protesters in Hyde Park, arresting 19 people for deliberately breaking social distancing guidelines.
I wouldn't go home because I want my freedom of speech.
London police dismissed them as only a small group, but as fear of the virus diminishes, anger at restrictions is set to grow. Michael Troy, ABC News.
In the United States, the coronavirus-induced economic downturn is being dubbed by some the she-cession because it's swallowing more jobs held by women than men. The phenomenon is happening across the globe and economists are warning it's unlikely all the jobs will return. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports from Washington.
2 months ago, Tina Edwards ran a bustling day spa in downtown DC. Now she's a full-time mum, with coronavirus shuttering her business, schools and daycare.
I want to say we'll be able to go back and reopen, but survive, I'm not sure.
Her family's living on her husband's income. She's relying on savings and donations to a GoFundMe page to make ends meet. Global shutdowns and social distancing measures are shattering female-dominated industries like retail, hospitality and education.
This is a recession in which is almost entirely driven by the fact that it's dangerous to be around other people.
This downturn is being dubbed the she session. That's because a majority of the 20 million jobs lost here in April were held by women. It's a trend repeated in countries across the globe, including Australia, and sits in stark contrast to the global financial crisis where men bore the brunt. The other difference this time, the closure of schools and daycares in many countries. It's an added burden for women who shoulder most of the home care duties.
Many women will have to choose their families. So families are really desperate and just hanging on by a thread.
Countries are starting to reopen, but the danger of catching the virus and the threat of a second wave remains, hampering a quick recovery. Tina Edwards is trying to stay positive. She's started remodelling her business to safely space clients, a new world she'd never imagined. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Washington.
As the country slowly reopens, many Australians have been enjoying a return to routine. But of course, it's not at all what we know as normal, with all types of places having to change the way they operate. For tonight's special report, we take a trip around the country to see how life is evolving. It's time to get out from under the doona. National Cabinet has laid out Australia's three-phase plan to lifting restrictions, but the reality of putting that into practice is only just setting in. Welcome to a day in the post-lockdown world. It's 6 a.m. in Brisbane and fitness buffs are back in the gym.
The gym is part of the daily routine for many Australians, and if you're like me, you can't wait to get back to it. But when the doors finally reopen, it's likely to look a little different.
Boot camps in the fresh air are likely to be a continuing feature, while inside, Joanne Johnson's preparing for when her members can return.
I think it'll be a new normal.
It's imagined the gym will have a cap on the number of people based on its floor space. And once you're in, that floor space will be clearly divided to keep gym goers socially distant at all times.
Members must book into class. We will then be able to allocate the equipment needed by that member.
It's not an option to share weights, and cleanliness is key. You may have added responsibilities each time you come to work out.
Things like having your own equipment allocated to you, it's also likely you'll be responsible for cleaning the gear as well.
Each space will be allocated with a container, obviously our detergent and their cloth.
Outdoor exercise may still be the preference. Just 30% of people say they'll go back to a gym anytime soon. But swimming laps at the local pool is still in limbo. Many operators can't wear the costs of making things COVID safe, while the number of lanes are limited.
It's 9 a.m. in Sydney and thousands of workers are arriving back at the office.
Office blocks across the city have been empty for months now, but they're about to come to life. This 39-storey office in North Sydney is normally home to 3,500 workers. The problem starts even before you reach your office floor. Most lifts are only a few metres wide and long, so adhering to social distancing rules means only 2 people are allowed in a lift at a time. Let's do a rough calculation. With 3,500 people in the building, 2 per lift means more than 1,700 trips. Each return trip takes on average 2 minutes. With 12 lifts, it means it'll take 5 hours to get everyone upstairs. And once you're up here, what will the workplace look like in a post-pandemic era?
It'll be very different. I think the fact that we've worked so well flexibly for so long now, people will insist upon that flexibility. Some people will want to work from home, some people will want to be in the office, some people might want to be somewhere in between.
The traditional 9-to-5 workday is unlikely to stay.
We want a staggered start time as well, so we don't want everyone turning up on the 1st of June at 9 o'clock. We want people to come in dribs and drabs at different points of the day, and I think that will be a permanent feature of the workplace of the future.
There'll be specific entry and exit points in each room to ensure one-way flow of people throughout the office. Some businesses have even refitted their whole office space, installing Perspex barriers and removing computers where desks are too close.
So the 6 feet office is a concept that can help businesses prepare for a safe return to work. So when you enter your work zone, you go to your desk, and around your desk there is a round sticker. The sticker tells you what your safe zone is. It's a reminder for colleagues to keep that 1.5 metre distance.
The communal kitchen area will also have to change. The recommendation is not to share the microwave, cutlery or crockery. When lunchtime hits, finding food outside the office will also be a different experience.
It's lunchtime in Perth. All those office workers will be ready to eat.
Food halls have been deserted since the lockdown measures started. But with office blocks and shopping centres reopening, the lights will come back on. At this Korean takeaway, getting the wok fired back up is an exciting step.
But I'm really happy to see people again.
Precautions are being put in place. McDonald's in the US just released guidelines for its stores. Self-service drinks machines are out, and those self-service kiosks will be turned off too. Bathrooms will be cleaned every 30 minutes. Tables wiped down between every customer. In hospitality, hygiene is the safest bet.
So I'm hiding my mouth and nose so I can keep distance from customers anyway. And I also hand sanitizers ready. Whenever I touch the cash, I wash.
Takeaway will be encouraged to avoid overcrowding. But when dining in is allowed again, things are going to look a little different. This is how many tables would normally be here at Market Hall. Moving ahead, that's going to have to reduce, and they'll be left with just this. Grabbing a quick bite is going to take a bit of planning.
Even after-work drinks won't be the same. It's 5 p.m. in Darwin and the beer is flowing again.
Here in the Northern Territory, pubs reopened on Friday. And what's happening here could be a sign of things to come across the country.
To be able to enjoy a cold one, there's a couple of rules that need to be followed. There's a 2-hour time limit at all venues. Like cafes, all tables need to be at least 1.5 metres apart. If you want alcohol, you'll need to buy food, and people must be seated for all food and drinks.
You know, I think about our poor brothers and sisters down there in Sydney and Melbourne, and, you know, trying to work out how just 10 people in a restaurant's going to work. And here we are going, how are we going to make only 10 on a table work, you know?
Well, going to the pub isn't exactly what it used to be. After weeks of lockdowns, just spending time out with friends feels like a cause for celebration.
Yeah, I'm really actually surprised because I thought it would be like a lot more stricter or just like a lot more not as relaxed.
Beer out of a keg rather than a stubby.
And it seems the proof is in the pint. It's estimated 1,000 kegs were used this opening weekend in the NT. That's 50,000 litres or 100,000 schooners.
As if all the changes so far aren't enough, getting home presents just as many challenges. This was Brisbane peak hour on Friday evening. Nothing like the normal gridlock, but as restrictions start to ease, more people are getting back in their cars. And 70% of Australians have said they'd be nervous about taking public transport after the pandemic.
Because we will see fewer people catching public transport, we believe, at least in the short term, and therefore more people on our roads. But we're still seeing far fewer people working in the CBD in particular at this stage.
Getting out of lockdown is just the first step. The way we live has changed, for good. Well, patronage on trains, buses and ferries in southeast Queensland plummeted by more than 80% at the height of our lockdowns. But official figures show small numbers of people are returning to public transport as restrictions ease. So as more of us travel around the city, heading into work or going to school, is public transport safe? I put that question to Transport Minister Mark Bailey a little earlier.
Look, it is safe. We have at the moment a huge reduction in volume, like most jurisdictions. So we're down 77%. So there's a lot of social distancing on public transport. But of course, we ask people to do the usual things like social distancing, hygiene, to make sure that you've got your hands sanitised or washed with soap before you go into a public space, and also when you leave a public space if you can.
I guess it's been easy to physically distance on trains and buses lately because, as you say, there have been so few people on board. But we saw quite startling scenes in London last week, for example, of people cramming onto the tube. How are you going to avoid scenes like that here?
Well, look, we obviously have much bigger, wider trains than the London Underground trains, which are very small and very tight. But we've got contingency planning in terms of how we progress and go forward. At the moment, there's a lot of capacity on the system, both bus, train and ferry, and we'll monitor how we go as people go back to work. Now, it's unlikely that we're going to be going back in exactly the same form that we had before, because some people will continue to work from home. We'll probably see staggered work rosters, both public and private, going forward to spread that peak period so that we've got a more even spread on our public transport system. And a lot of people are cycling as well.
So as trains and buses get busier, what does that look like? What is the planning? Does it include imposing passenger limits, for example, to ensure social distancing?
Well, look, we're looking at all kinds of measures. There's already some measures in place. So people will have noticed that there's rear door boarding only. So there's a bit of a buffer from passengers to the driver. The seats behind the driver are being cordoned off. And of course, we've moved to cashless as well. So there's less interaction going on. So there's already safety measures in place. We will be looking into the future in terms of, do we need to supplement some services with additional buses? That's certainly a possibility.
If people avoid public transport and drive instead, the roads will become a bit of a nightmare, won't they?
Well, we've got to monitor that closely because what we're seeing at the moment is we've seen a slight uptick in public transport use in the last week, and we expect that will increase again on May the 25th as kids go back to school and parents go back to work. But look, we're not going to have exactly the same economy and exactly the same workforce as we did pre-pandemic. We know that there will sadly be less jobs than there were before. We'll see people travelling in a different time pattern. We'll see that spread across the peak, so that will help us in terms of social distancing. And look, some people will have tried different modes, for instance active transport, and have really liked it and may well stick to it.
Minister, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jess.
Australians are jumping on their bikes like never before, seeking a form of transport and exercise that doesn't involve getting close to others. Advocates are hoping that it'll be a permanent boost, but are calling for changes to cities and towns to make them more cycling friendly. Here's National Sport reporter David Mark.
Krista Shearer rode her bike to work this week for the first time in 9 years.
It was amazing. It was fast. It was lovely to feel the wind through my hair, and it was good not to be on public transport.
The Sydney-based recruiter is one of tens of thousands of Australians creating an unprecedented surge in cycling's popularity.
There is a silver lining, and it is that people are rediscovering the joy of being out with their family, whether it's on bikes or walking around their local areas.
And not just rediscovering. Thousands of Australians are getting on bikes for the first time as shops report a doubling in average sales.
We've really seen an explosion in families riding, so it's been a fantastic picture to watch families walk in, a father and mother walk in and walk out with 4 bikes.
It's evident on the cycle lanes of Australian cities, where numbers of riders have jumped by between 50 and 300%. But it's the lack of cars which has been the biggest change to Australia's cities and towns. The question is, what happens now that people are starting to go back to work?
There is an enormous tsunami of problems coming out of COVID to rebuild our economy. It is that public transport will not be able to carry the people that it normally carries.
But there's a catch.
If everyone gets into their car, the roads won't move.
It's why some cities are taking action. London will extend its car-free zone into one of the largest in the world to make it safer for cyclists and pedestrians. Krista Shearer says her experience of riding to work was a good one, but there are concerns that other new cyclists won't find it so easy.
The increase in people walking and riding has highlighted the lack of infrastructure that we have.
And this is what frustrates cyclists so much, a dedicated cycle lane on a busy road that suddenly stops.
What will happen is people who've bought all these bicycles and they thought, oh, I could try my ride to work, they'll do it once, they'll get a horrible scare or they'll get knocked off their bike and they won't ride again.
Which is why We Ride's Stephen Hodge is pushing to rapidly gear up Australia's cities and towns with temporary cycle lanes, as Berlin has just done.
They can be put in place within days. If there are multi-lane roads, a lane can be devoted to a cycleway.
And then make a permanent change.
It is the time that we must take some steps to make sure we allow people to keep riding, keep healthy, keep active.
Australian governments are still weighing up the options, but there is a mood to seize the moment and remake our cities. David Mark, ABC News.
In India, at least 24 migrant workers trying to return home during the lockdown have been killed in a truck accident. Dozens more were injured as the truck, crammed with people desperate to get to their hometowns, collided with another truck in northern India. Thousands of migrant workers have been trying to flee India's major cities since the lockdown began nearly 2 months ago, which left many of them without jobs or pay. Many have set out on gruelling journeys on foot, walking hundreds of kilometres or hitching rides on trucks. Brazil now has the fourth largest coronavirus outbreak in the world, with the number of cases surpassing Italy and Spain. More than 233,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19 in Brazil, and about 16,000 have died. The country's president continues to downplay the virus and has been very critical of lockdowns. And there are more signs that life is getting back to normal in Wuhan, the Chinese city where the pandemic began. People are once again dancing by the Yangtze River, now with masks and social distancing. Dancing outdoors is a popular pastime for many Chinese people. Well, if there's one thing we all love, it's a holiday, but many people have had to cancel overseas trips because of coronavirus travel restrictions. And getting a refund for cancelled holidays isn't always as easy as it sounds. Alison Shao reports.
For a travel-loving couple, it was the stuff of dreams.
The best and most luxurious train in the world.
But this South African odyssey never happened.
Really leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
Don and Bridget Bernard booked a $30,000 adventure last year.
And that looked amazing.
They've been refunded a third of their ticket, but $20,000 remains outstanding, offered as a credit to be used on the same package at a later date.
We don't know how our own health condition will be next year. I think there's too many ifs and buts about it.
The travel industry says money is tied up in a complex global system of suppliers. Airlines, hotels, restaurants and local attractions, all of which are feeling the pinch.
In that entire supply chain, there are contracts that include non-refundable deposits.
The terms and conditions for each holiday are different, so there's no general answer to what customers are legally entitled to.
It's not that easy to just simply get a refund. It's not the consumer's fault, it's not the travel agent's fault, it's not the tour operator's fault.
The ACCC says it doesn't have the power to enforce contractual rights, and it says it's not easy to determine whether a contract has been frustrated because Australian consumer law provides for unforeseen circumstances, like travel being cancelled due to government restrictions. The Bernards say there's been nowhere to turn.
It seems to me, anyway, that it's deliberately made difficult so they don't have to give you answers.
It's been stalling, waiting for us to just give up and walk away.
But that's unlikely. Alison Shao, ABC News.
While the latest unemployment numbers showed the biggest monthly rise on record, the impact on Australians is even greater than the official rate suggests. About 600,000 people lost their jobs in April and unemployment hit 6.2%. But when you include the millions of workers on the JobKeeper wage subsidy, more than half of the population is receiving help. And as Alan Kohler explains, high unemployment is likely to last for many years.
On Thursday, we learnt that the unemployment rate had increased from 5.2 to 6.2%, or 104,000 extra people. But 600,000 jobs disappeared. Commonwealth Bank told us this week via this graph that almost all of the growth in the money flowing into its customers' bank accounts at the moment is coming as government benefits rather than wages. These are all some kind of unemployment payment, either the dole, which is called the job seeker allowance now, or the new thing called JobKeeper allowance. The Treasurer said this week that 6 million people are covered by JobKeeper and 1.6 million are getting job seeker, which more or less adds up to what CBA has found. But only 823,300 of them are counted by the ABS as unemployed, even though they're not actually employed. If all those people were counted as unemployed, the unemployment rate would be, well, 58%. Thank goodness they're not. Imagine the national despondency if the ABS reported that the unemployment rate was twice what it got to in the Great Depression. Why aren't they counted? Well, because those getting JobKeeper aren't unemployed. And for those getting job seeker to be counted as unemployed, they would have to have been actively looking for work. And since the amount has suddenly doubled and is now enough to live on, a lot of unemployed people aren't bothering to look because they know there aren't any jobs anyway. So, lies, damn lies and statistics, as Mark Twain once said. But the real world is places like this. The arts and recreation centres have seen massive declines in available work, and employment in restaurants and accommodation has collapsed as well. The government is budgeting for the temporary employment benefits to go for 6 months, and then for the private sector to bounce back and lead job creation. But will it in 6 months? A lot of private sector outfits are stuffed, never to lead job creation again. And for that reason, unemployment is a scourge that lasts. In the last recession, the unemployment rate went above 8% in December 1990, and it didn't go below it again until October 1997, almost 7 years. And this recession looks worse than that one.
For the first time, Australia has managed to breed a pair of rare leopard cubs, causing great excitement at the New South Wales Wildlife Facility where they were born. The clouded leopard cubs were born at the Wildcat Conservation Centre, a male named Ty and a female named Cinta. The pair will be joined by other leopards as part of an international breeding program. Time for a quick look at Queensland's weather now. Hello, Jenny Woodward.
Thanks, Jess. Hello, everyone. Well, it's been windy along the coast with gusts of about 90 kilometres an hour overnight, and today up to 60 kilometres an hour at Double Island Point and nearly 70 at Hamilton Island. There's also been persistent showers in those onshore winds, and they've added up to some good totals around the Sunshine Coast. Mount Billawillam and Coops Corner have both had about 130 millimetres since 9 a.m. yesterday morning. Some scattered showers about the tropical coast and ranges too, with 15 millimetres in Tully and 32 millimetres at the Boulders. Now that showery weather will extend inland over the coming week and falls of 10 to 15 millimetres are possible. I'll be back with all the details soon. Jess.
Thanks, Jenny. Former Australian Rugby League captain Arthur Summons has died at the age of 84. The halfback featured in this iconic photograph with rival forward Norm Provan, taken after the 1963 Grand Final. The image is now depicted on the NRL Premiership trophy, named in their honour. Summons played for West's Magpies and represented New South Wales and Australia.
Arthur represents everything about not only rugby league, but being Australian. He wasn't a man of tall stature, he was only a small man, but what he lacked in size, he had in heart, brilliance, fierce determination.
Prior to his league career, Summons also played 10 rugby union tests. A private service will be held in Wagga Wagga. The supercars season will resume on the 27th of June with a spectator-free event at the Sydney Motorsport Park. The Bathurst 1000 will run in its original time slot of the 11th of October. The street circuit races that were scheduled for the Gold Coast and Newcastle have been scrapped.
We've decided that given the disruption that those residents have been through, given the challenges around social distancing, it's just not appropriate to be running those events.
The Mount Panorama Circuit will host a second event in February. Top flight football has returned to Europe with the resumption of the German Bundesliga. 6 games were played as the competition became the first of the major European leagues to resume during the coronavirus pandemic. Most players followed the social distancing guidelines during goal-scoring celebrations, but some couldn't contain their excitement at being back on the pitch. Players did their best to generate their own atmosphere without spectators.
What everybody misses is the energy which a stadium has if it's sold out or if it's a full crowd. This is what everybody misses.
The English Premier League is expected to return next month. Panic buying saw the country's supermarkets stripped of flour as many turned to ISO baking. Milling companies struggled to keep shelves restocked, but Australia's biggest miller says it won't get caught out again. Landline's Pip Courtney has the story.
When COVID-19 forced families to stay home, many became creative in the kitchen. In Brisbane, the Cole family bakes most days.
It's been really fun for us to do something together, to experiment.
Harrison and Mia have loved it.
Give it to your friends and they text back saying, "Oh, it's so good, thank you." It's a good feeling to have.
Finding flour, though, has been hard, with supermarket shelves bare for weeks.
Is that going to be enough, do you think?
Milling companies were stunned by the spike in sales.
The retail has just been ridiculously high, about 70% over normal volume.
Manildra Group is Australia's biggest flour producer and has moved its main New South Wales mill to a 24/7 operation and hired extra staff.
That's 10 weeks ago and we're still doing that now and endeavouring to supply all of the supermarkets and people with the flour that they'd like to have.
ISO baking's put a strain on the country's wheat supply lines, but new equipment will see Manildra Group produce an extra 50 million 1 kilo bags of flour a year from July. Toowoomba-based organic miller Kyella Foods has hired extra staff and run double shifts to keep up.
In March and April, we're about 300% up on those retail type products. People are falling in love with cooking again and it's great.
Keen cooks can look forward to full shelves very soon. Pip Courtney, ABC News.
Weather now with Jenny Woodward.
Thanks, Jess. Hello again. Grey skies today along the coastal fringe and that windy, showery weather will continue tomorrow. On the radar, you can see there's quite a bit of activity offshore in the southeast. Some storms about the Gold Coast and Southern Islands through the evening and we may see them making it into Brisbane as well. 15 to 25 degrees in the city today, 26 for Ipswich, but it was a little bit cooler by the water, 24 in Redcliffe and Redland. A cool night over southern parts, 6 in Roma, 7 for St George, but mild to warm through the day. 26 in Gladstone and 28 up in Cairns. On the satellite, you can see the cloud developing over eastern districts and there's been some shower activity in this low cloud over Tasmania. Another very cold front moving across from the west. There'll be snow again later in the week. But tomorrow, early fog for Melbourne. Canberra will have frost as well. Mostly sunny and mild in Sydney, a top of 21 degrees. Onto the chart, and the big high to the south is reinforcing our coastal ridge so that onshore moisture will push well inland. An upper trough's moving into the southwest on Wednesday, so some showers and patchy rain will extend east, and it's going to be followed by a cold, dry air mass. Temperatures will be up to 11 degrees below average. So a moderate to high chance of showers all along the coast and pushing through to the central west tomorrow and then into the southwest on Wednesday. The strong wind warning extends from Double Island Point all the way up to Torres Strait. Now to forecasts, and coastal showers persisting in the north with a high chance on the north tropical coast. 28 degrees expected in Cairns and it'll be a sunny 29 in Mount Isa. Mostly sunny over the southern inland, but showers are pushing through central parts, possibly reaching Winton and Longreach tomorrow. 28 expected there, 25 for Gladstone. A high chance of coastal showers and the chance of a storm about the south coast islands, but fine on the range, although there could be an early shower on the granite belt. We're looking at 12 to 19 in Toowoomba, 22 in Kingaroy. In Brisbane, partly cloudy, a 70% chance of showers, possibly a storm about the islands, 25 for the city, Ipswich and Beaudesert, 24 in Redcliffe and Caboolture. On Moreton Bay, southeasterly winds to 25 knots at times in the Northern Bay and seas to 1.5 metres. There's a medium chance of showers for the rest of the week, but then easing a little bit on the weekend. Temperatures will cool from Friday. We're looking at 14 to 22 in the city, down to 10 overnight on Friday and 8 degrees expected in the west on Saturday. That's the weather. Back to you, Jess.
Thanks, Jenny. And that is ABC News for now. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.